The sound of sneakers pounding against the cracked asphalt echoed through the empty park as Ethan sprinted, his heart hammering in his chest. The voices of the bullies behind him, taunting, jeering, grew louder, closing in like a pack of wolves. His backpack felt heavier with every step, and his lungs burned with each desperate gulp of air. "Run all you want, loser! You can't hide forever!" one of them shouted, laughter slicing through the cool autumn air. Ethan stumbled, his foot catching on a loose rock. He hit the ground hard, scraping his palms against the rough pavement. Before he could push himself up, they were on him, their shadows stretching long under the flickering street lamp. He braced himself, waiting for the next insult or shove, when a deep guttural growl cut through the night like a thunderclap. Everyone froze. Out of the darkness emerged a Pitbull, its muscular frame outlined against the weak glow of the lamp. Its ears were scarred, and its eyes were sharp and unyielding, locked on the group of boys with an intensity that made them step back instinctively. "Whoa! Is that thing yours?" one of the bullies stammered, his voice trembling. Ethan could only shake his head, too stunned to speak. The dog took another step forward, placing itself firmly between Ethan and his attackers. It let out another low growl, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. "Forget this, man. Let's get out of here," another boy yelled, and within seconds they scattered, disappearing into the night. The park fell silent except for the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing. Slowly, he looked up at the dog, expecting it to leave now that the danger had passed. But it didn't. Instead, it sat down a few feet away, its tail wagging gently as if to say, "You're safe now." "Where did you come from?" Ethan whispered, his voice shaky. He reached out tentatively, his scraped hand trembling. The dog sniffed his fingers before pressing its cold, wet nose into his palm. "Buddy," Ethan said softly, the name spilling from his lips without a second thought. "I think I'll call you Buddy." Ethan's mother wasn't thrilled when he brought Buddy home that night. Sarah Evans was a practical woman, juggling 2 jobs to keep their small house running. The last thing she needed was an uninvited guest, especially one with such a reputation. "Ethan, we can't keep him," she said firmly, crossing her arms as she glanced at the dog lying peacefully by the couch. "Pitbulls are unpredictable." "He's not like that, Mom," Ethan protested, his voice rising with desperation. "He saved me tonight. If it weren't for him—" He stopped, the memory of the bullies closing in on him still too fresh. Sarah's expression softened, but only slightly. "He might be a good dog, Ethan, but we don't know where he came from. He could belong to someone else, or worse, he could be dangerous." Ethan knelt beside Buddy, who looked up at him with calm, trusting eyes. "Please, Mom, just one night. If no one claims him, I'll find a way to take care of him. You won't have to do anything, I promise." Sarah sighed, her resolve faltering. "One night," she relented, pointing a finger at her son. "But he's sleeping in the garage." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening in his mind. Buddy had appeared out of nowhere, like some kind of guardian angel. But why? And where had he come from? Unable to shake the questions, Ethan slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the garage. Buddy was curled up on an old blanket Ethan had found, his chest rising and falling steadily. When Ethan sat down beside him, Buddy opened one eye, his tail thumping against the floor. "You're not just some stray, are you?" Ethan asked quietly, stroking the dog's head. "You've been through stuff, I can tell." Buddy licked Ethan's hand in response, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone. The next morning, trouble came knocking in the form of Officer Grace Bennett. Tall and no-nonsense, with her dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, she stood on the Evans' front porch, with a clipboard in one hand and a badge clipped to her belt. "We've had reports of a pit bull in the area," she said, her sharp eyes scanning the small living room. "We believe it might be a stray, with a history of aggression." Ethan's heart sank. "He's not aggressive. He saved me," he blurted out before his mother could respond. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Saved you?" Ethan quickly recounted the events of the previous night, his voice trembling but resolute. Grace listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she sighed and crouched down to Buddy's level, studying him closely. "Let's get one thing straight," Grace said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Just because he acted like a hero last night doesn't mean he's not dangerous. Pitbulls have complicated reputations." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "That's not fair. You don't even know him." Grace stood, fixing Ethan with a pointed look. "You're right. I don't, but I aim to find out." As she left with Buddy reluctantly following on a leash, Ethan felt a knot of anger and helplessness twist in his chest. He'd finally found someone, or something, who cared, and now it was being taken away. But as Buddy glanced back at him before disappearing into Grace's car, Ethan made a silent promise: "I'll bring you back home, no matter what it takes." The house felt unbearably quiet without Buddy. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, poking at his cereal as the morning light streamed through the windows. His mother moved about the room, preparing for her shift, but the air between them was tense. "You should eat," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. Ethan shook his head, staring at the empty spot by the door, where Buddy had slept just hours before. "He doesn't belong in a cage. He didn't do anything wrong." Sarah sighed, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Ethan, I know you're upset, but Officer Bennett is just doing her job. She's trying to make sure he's safe." "He is safe," Ethan snapped, his voice rising. "But no one will give him a chance because of how he looks." Sarah sat down across from him, her face lined with worry. "Life isn't always fair, honey. People make judgments, right or wrong. But maybe this is for the best." Ethan's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his cereal untouched. "It's not for the best. He saved me, Mom, and now I have to save him." Without another word, Ethan grabbed his backpack and stormed out the door, slamming it behind him. The whispers started before Ethan even reached the school gates. "Did you hear? Ethan Evans was attacked by a pit bull last night," one girl said, her voice low but carrying enough for Ethan to hear. "No, it saved him." "Or something like that," another boy replied, laughing. "Maybe he trained it to go after those bullies." Ethan clenched his fists, his face burning as he pushed past the cluster of students. He wanted to yell, to tell them they were wrong. But what was the point? People always believed what they wanted to believe. As he sat in his homeroom, doodling in the margins of his notebook, a folded piece of paper landed on his desk. He unfolded it cautiously, his heart sinking when he read the crude drawing of a snarling dog with the words, "Watch out. Ethan's killer dog is next." His hands trembled as he crumpled the paper. The classroom noise seemed to fade into the background as his mind raced. No one understood Buddy. No one wanted to understand. And if Ethan didn't do something soon, Buddy would be labeled a threat forever. After school, Ethan rode his bike straight to the animal shelter, his heart pounding as he approached the chain-link fence. The shelter was small and run down, with faded paint and rusted cages. A volunteer at the front desk, a kind-looking woman in her 60s, greeted him. "Hi there, can I help you?" she asked, her smile warm but wary. "I'm here to see Buddy," Ethan said firmly. The woman hesitated. "You mean the Pitbull Officer Bennett brought in this morning? I'm sorry, but he's under observation right now. You'll have to come back later." "Please," Ethan pleaded. "I just need to see him. He's not like the others." The woman studied him for a moment, then sighed. "All right, but just for a minute." And no touching, he's still being evaluated. She led him to a row of kennels, the sound of barking and whining dogs growing louder as they walked. At the far end, Buddy sat in a small enclosure, his ears perking up when he saw Ethan. His tail wagged weakly, thumping against the concrete floor. "Buddy," Ethan whispered, gripping the chain-link fence. Buddy stood and pressed his nose against the mesh, his brown eyes filled with recognition. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "I'm gonna get you out of here," he promised. "I don't care what it takes." That evening, Ethan sat at his desk, his mind racing as he scribbled down ideas. Posters, petitions, social media, anything to get the word out about Buddy. He couldn't do it alone, though. He needed help. The next day, during lunch, Ethan approached his classmate Lily, the only person he could think of who might care. Lily was known for her passion for animals, always sharing stories about rescues and fundraisers. "Lily," he began, his voice hesitant, "I need your help." She looked up from her sandwich, raising an eyebrow. "With what?" "It's about Buddy," he explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He's not dangerous. He's a hero, but no one will listen to me. I want to prove to the town that he deserves a chance." Lily tilted her head, considering. "That's actually really brave of you, Ethan, but how do we convince people? Most of them are scared of pit bulls." "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, "but we have to try." After a moment, Lily nodded. "All right, let's do it." By the end of the week, Ethan and Lily had created a campaign, posters with Buddy's face and the words, "Every dog deserves a chance," plastered around town, a petition demanding the shelter release Buddy into Ethan's care, and a plan to spread the word online. Slowly, people began to take notice, but not everyone was on their side. Late one afternoon, as Ethan was hanging a poster outside the grocery store, a man stormed up to him, ripping the paper from the wall. "You think we want to kill a dog running around this town?" the man barked, his face red with anger. "You're putting everyone at risk." Ethan stood his ground, his voice shaking but determined. "Buddy's not a killer, he's a hero." The man scoffed, crumpling the poster in his hand. "You're a fool if you think anyone's gonna believe that." As the man walked away, Ethan felt the weight of doubt settle over him. Could he really change people's minds? Was he fighting a losing battle? But then he thought of Buddy, his unwavering loyalty, his quiet strength. If Buddy could stand by him, even when the world was against them, Ethan knew he couldn't give up. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan silently renewed his promise. "I'll fight for you, Buddy, no matter what." The animal shelter felt quieter than usual when Officer Grace Bennett arrived early that morning. She carried a manila folder under her arm, her expression serious as she approached the row of kennels. Buddy lay in the corner of his enclosure, his eyes tracking her every move. His calm, unyielding gaze seemed to pierce right through her. "You've seen things, haven't you, boy?" Grace murmured, crouching down by the chain-link door. Buddy didn't move, but his ears twitched at the sound of her voice. Grace stood and sighed. She wasn't one to trust easily, especially when it came to animals with a history, but there was something different about this dog. He wasn't aggressive, not like the others she'd encountered in her years on the force. No barking, no lunging, just a quiet, almost stoic presence. Still, she couldn't let her guard down. Not yet. Back at the station, Grace opened the manila folder and spread the documents across her desk. The papers detailed a raid from 3 years earlier, a massive operation that had uncovered an illegal dogfighting ring on the outskirts of a neighboring town. She remembered the case well. It had been one of the largest in the region, involving dozens of abused dogs. Most had been too damaged physically and emotionally to rehome. One name stood out on the report: Subject Alpha, a male pit bull, scarred but not aggressive, who had escaped during the raid. A few grainy photos showed a dog that looked eerily similar to Buddy. Could it be the same dog? Grace leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. If Buddy had been part of that ring, it would explain his scars and his guarded demeanor. But it also meant he carried the weight of a violent past, a stigma that could seal his fate if the town found out. Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone. It was Sarah Evans. "Officer Bennett, it's Ethan," Sarah began, her voice fraught with worry. He's gone all in on this campaign for the dog. He's putting up posters, talking to people, and I don't know how to get through to him. I don't want him to get hurt." Grace sighed. "I'll talk to him, Sarah. I'll make sure he understands the risks." "Please do," Sarah replied. "He's stubborn, just like his father was." As the call ended, Grace glanced at the photo of Buddy on her desk. She didn't know whether to admire Ethan's determination or fear for the heartbreak she knew he might face. Later that afternoon, Grace pulled up to the park where Ethan had first encountered Buddy. Sure enough, she found him there, sitting on a bench with Lily, a stack of posters between them. Ethan looked up as she approached, his eyes narrowing in defiance. "Here to take down our posters?" he asked, his tone sharp. Grace sat down beside him, ignoring the question. "You're pretty passionate about this dog, huh?" "He's not just a dog," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "He's my friend, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like some monster." Grace studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You're a brave kid, Ethan. But you need to understand something. Buddy's past, it's complicated." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing. Grace hesitated, then decided to tell him the truth. "We think Buddy might have been part of a dogfighting ring a few years ago. If that's true, it could make it harder to convince people he's safe, even if he's never hurt anyone." Ethan's face fell, but only for a moment. Then he squared his shoulders, his determination shining through. "So what? He didn't choose that life. People made him do those things. That doesn't mean he's bad." Grace felt a pang of admiration for the boy's unwavering faith. "You're right, it doesn't. But not everyone will see it that way. And if you want to help Buddy, you'll need more than just posters and petitions. You'll need proof." The next few days were a whirlwind. Ethan, with Lily's help, dug into Buddy's past, searching for anything that could help their case. They interviewed neighbors, combed through old news articles, and even visited the shelter's records office. It wasn't easy. Many people were hesitant to talk, and others outright refused. But slowly, a picture began to form. Buddy had been found wandering near the edge of town, covered in cuts and bruises but still wagging his tail. A local vet had patched him up before the shelter took him in. There were no records of him ever biting or attacking anyone, not even during his time on the streets. But it wasn't enough. They needed something more, something that would change the town's perception of Buddy once and for all. One evening, as Ethan sat in his room poring over his notes, his mother walked in and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been working hard," she said softly. "But Ethan, what if it's not enough?" Ethan looked up at her, his eyes brimming with tears. "It has to be enough, Mom. Buddy saved me. Now it's my turn to save him." Sarah's heart ached at the raw emotion in her son's voice. She knelt down beside him, pulling him into a hug. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll figure this out together." The next morning, Grace received an unexpected call from the veterinarian who had treated Buddy. "There's something you should know," the vet said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Buddy didn't just escape that ring. He helped the authorities find it." Grace's eyes widened. "Are you saying—" "Yes," the vet confirmed. "During the raid, Buddy led officers to the underground area where the fights were held. If it weren't for him, they might never have found it." Grace hung up the phone, her mind racing. This was the proof Ethan needed. Buddy wasn't just a survivor. He was a hero. By the time Grace pulled up to Ethan's house, he was already waiting on the porch, his face lighting up when he saw her. She stepped out of the car, holding the vet's report in her hand. "I think you're going to want to see this," she said with a small smile. Ethan took the papers, his eyes scanning the words quickly. When he looked up, his expression was a mix of disbelief and hope. "He saved them," Ethan whispered. "He saved those dogs." Grace nodded. "And now, it's your turn to make sure everyone knows it." Ethan stood at the front of the town meeting hall, clutching the papers Officer Grace had given him. His heart raced as he glanced at the faces in the crowd, parents, teachers, neighbors, and even a few of his classmates. Some wore expressions of curiosity, others of skepticism, and a few outright hostility. Buddy's future was riding on this moment. Sarah sat in the front row, offering him an encouraging nod. Beside her, Lily gave a subtle thumbs up, her support unwavering. Even Officer Grace, standing near the back, had a look of quiet confidence that helped steady Ethan's nerves. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Ethan Evans," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "and I'm here to talk about Buddy, the Pitbull who saved my life." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan pressed on, determined not to let the noise distract him. "Buddy isn't just a stray. He's not a danger, and he's definitely not a monster. He's a hero." Ethan held up the vet's report. 3 years ago, Buddy helped uncover one of the largest dogfighting rings in the area. He led the police to the underground area, where they found dozens of dogs suffering in horrible conditions. Without him, they might never have been rescued. The crowd grew quiet, a few heads tilting in surprise. But even after everything he went through, Buddy didn't give up on people, Ethan continued. When I was being bullied at the park, he stepped in to protect me. He didn't attack anyone, he just scared them off. And since then, all he's done is show love and loyalty. Ethan scanned the room, his voice growing stronger. I know some of you think he's dangerous just because he's a pit bull, but that's not fair. Buddy didn't choose his breed, and he didn't choose his past. What he did choose was to protect me, to trust me, even when he had every reason not to. He paused, letting his words sink in. Every dog deserves a chance. Buddy deserves a chance. As Ethan stepped back from the podium, the room erupted into a mix of applause and murmured conversation. Lily leaned over to whisper, "You crushed it." But not everyone was convinced. Mr. Thompson, one of the bully's fathers, stood up, his face red with anger. "That's a nice story, kid, but you're asking us to ignore the facts. Pit bulls are dangerous. We've all seen the headlines. They attack people. They turn on their owners. Are we supposed to just trust that won't happen here?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Grace stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson," she said, her tone firm, "those facts you're talking about, they're based on fear and misinformation. The truth is, any dog can be dangerous if it's mistreated or poorly trained. Buddy's actions speak louder than stereotypes. He's proven himself to be loyal, protective, and safe." Mr. Thompson huffed, but before he could retort, another voice chimed in. "I met Buddy," said Mrs. Carter, the owner of the local diner. She stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "That dog is sweet as can be. My grandson played with him when Ethan brought him by the other day, and he was nothing but gentle. I think we're judging him unfairly." One by one, others began to speak up, some defending Buddy, others expressing lingering doubts. The meeting stretched late into the evening, with voices rising and falling like waves. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Ethan felt both exhausted and hopeful. A few people had approached him to offer their support, while others had left quietly, their minds clearly not made up. It wasn't the clear victory he had hoped for, but it was progress. Outside, under the glow of the streetlights, Grace placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You did good tonight," she said. "Do you think it's enough?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace hesitated, then gave him a reassuring smile. "It's a start." The next day, Ethan's campaign picked up steam. His story, combined with the vet's report, spread quickly through the town and even reached the local news. A reporter interviewed him on his front porch, while Lily managed their growing social media presence, sharing photos of Buddy with the hashtag "Every dog deserves a chance." But as the attention grew, so did the backlash. Anonymous flyers began appearing around town, warning people about the dangerous pit bull. One even showed a doctored photo of Buddy snarling, his teeth bared menacingly. Ethan was crushed when he saw it. "They're lying," he said angrily, tearing the flyer down. "Buddy's not like that." "They're scared," Sarah said gently, watching her son pace the living room. "When people are scared, they sometimes act out." Ethan shook his head. "It's not fair." "No, it's not," she agreed. "But you've already shown this town that Buddy is worth fighting for. Keep going. Don't let them win." That night, Ethan received a message from Grace. "Town council meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. They'll be voting on Buddy's future. Be there." Ethan stared at the message, his stomach churning. Everything they'd worked for was coming down to this. If the council ruled against Buddy, he would likely be taken from the shelter and euthanized. But if they ruled in his favor, Buddy would be free to come home. Ethan turned to Buddy's empty blanket by the couch, his chest tightening. "We've got one more fight, Buddy," he whispered, "and we're gonna win." The town council chamber was packed. Rows of folding chairs were filled with neighbors, teachers, shop owners, and even some classmates. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his hands clenched tightly around a folder of documents. Beside him, Lily adjusted a poster with Buddy's photo and the words, "Every dog deserves a chance." Officer Grace stood off to the side, her expression calm but watchful, ready to speak if needed. Sarah sat in the front row, her gaze unwavering as she silently willed her son to stay strong. The council members, 5 in total, sat behind a long wooden table. The mayor, an older man with kind eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, banged his gavel to quiet the murmurs. "We're here tonight to discuss the matter of Buddy, the Pitbull currently in custody at the Millbrook Animal Shelter," he began. "This dog has become a point of contention in our community, and it's our responsibility to decide whether he poses a threat or if he deserves to stay in town under the care of Ethan Evans." The room buzzed with tension. Ethan glanced back at the crowd, catching a mix of encouraging smiles and skeptical stares. He took a deep breath as the mayor gestured for him to speak. "Ethan, you have the floor." Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear his own voice. "Thank you, Mayor Davis," he began. "I know a lot of you think Buddy is dangerous just because he's a pit bull. But Buddy isn't like the stories you've heard. He's not aggressive or mean. He's brave, and he's loyal." He paused, glancing at his notes, but choosing to speak from his heart instead. "Buddy saved my life. When I was being bullied in the park, he came out of nowhere and stood between me and the boys who were going to hurt me. He didn't bite or attack them. He just scared them off. And after that, he stayed with me. He made me feel safe." Ethan turned to the council, his voice steady despite his fear. "But that's not all. Buddy helped the police rescue other dogs from a terrible situation. He didn't give up on people, even when people treated him badly. And now he needs us to give him a chance." The room was silent as Ethan held up the vet's report. "This proves that Buddy isn't dangerous. He's a survivor. He's a hero." The mayor nodded as Ethan stepped back. "Thank you, Ethan. Officer Grace, would you like to add anything?" Grace rose from her seat, her uniform crisp and her tone authoritative. "I've worked in law enforcement for over a decade," she began. "In that time, I've dealt with dangerous animals, including dogs involved in dogfighting rings. Buddy doesn't fit the profile of an aggressive or unstable animal. He's calm, intelligent, and protective. The fact that he helped during the raid 3 years ago shows his character. I believe Buddy deserves to stay in Millbrook under proper care." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Grace's words carried weight, but not everyone was convinced. Mr. Thompson, the father of one of the bullies, stood next. "This is all well and good, but what happens when that dog turns on someone? What happens when Ethan can't control him? Are we supposed to wait until someone gets hurt?" Ethan clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Mrs. Carter, the diner owner, stood. "That's enough, Tom. You're letting fear make your decisions. I've seen Buddy with Ethan. That dog is gentle, and he's not the problem here. The problem is people like you spreading lies and fear." The tension in the room crackled like static. More voices chimed in, some in support of Buddy, others voicing concerns. The mayor banged his gavel again, calling for order. Finally, it was time for the council to deliberate. The room was eerily quiet as they whispered among themselves, their expressions serious. Ethan gripped the edge of the podium, his knuckles white. After what felt like an eternity, the mayor turned back to the room. "We've come to a decision." Ethan held his breath. "After reviewing the evidence, including the testimonies from Officer Grace and the veterinarian, as well as considering Ethan's passionate advocacy, we find no grounds to classify Buddy as a dangerous animal. However, we will require regular check-ins to ensure his continued good behavior." A smile broke across Ethan's face as the mayor concluded, "Buddy will be released into Ethan's care, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause, though not everyone joined in. Ethan didn't care. He felt a surge of relief and pride as he turned to his mom, who was clapping through tears. Lily threw an arm around his shoulders. "We did it!" Officer Grace approached him, a rare smile on her face. "You earned this, Ethan. Now take care of that dog." And that evening, Ethan and Sarah drove to the shelter to bring Buddy home. When Buddy saw Ethan, his tail wagged so hard it seemed like it might fall off. Ethan dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog as Buddy licked his face furiously. "You're coming home, Buddy," Ethan whispered, "for good this time." As they walked out of the shelter together, the stars overhead seemed brighter than ever. Ethan looked down at Buddy, his faithful companion, and felt a surge of gratitude. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because Buddy wasn't just a dog, he was family, and family always fought for each other. The crisp morning air was filled with the soft hum of activity in the Evans household. Ethan had woken early, unable to contain his excitement. Buddy, now officially part of the family, followed him from room to room, his tail wagging like a metronome. The house, once quiet and lonely, now felt alive with energy. Sarah watched from the kitchen, a faint smile playing on her lips as Ethan chatted with Buddy while packing his school bag. It had been years since she'd seen her son so happy, so confident. The transformation was remarkable, and all because of a dog who had brought a spark back into their lives. "You ready, champ?" she asked, handing Ethan his lunch. "More than ready," Ethan replied, grinning as Buddy nudged his hand for one last pat before they left. The walk to school was different that day. Buddy trotted beside Ethan on a brand new leash, his head held high, like he understood how special this moment was. People they passed on the street smiled and waved, some stopping to comment on how well-behaved Buddy was. Even a few of Ethan's classmates, the same ones who had mocked him before, now approached with cautious curiosity. "Hey, Ethan," one boy said, his tone uncertain. "Is that Buddy?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "He's my dog now." The boy glanced at Buddy, who wagged his tail and gave a friendly sniff. "He's actually kinda cool." Ethan smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. Buddy wasn't just changing his life, he was changing how people saw him too. By lunchtime, the word had spread through the school. Ethan and Buddy were a team. Ethan found himself at the center of attention for the first time, answering questions about Buddy's heroics and sharing the story of how they'd fought to stay together. Even Lily, who normally kept to herself, seemed to bask in the newfound positivity surrounding their campaign. "You know," she said, leaning across the lunch table, "Buddy might be the most popular student at this school." Ethan laughed. "Yeah, but I don't think they'd let him in without a backpack." After school, Ethan and Buddy walked to the park, their favorite place. The air was golden with the late afternoon sun, and the once intimidating space now felt like a sanctuary. Ethan let Buddy off the leash, watching as he bounded through the grass, chasing a stray leaf with the same joy and abandon as a puppy. For a moment, Ethan let himself just be. The weight of the past few weeks, the fear, the anger, the uncertainty, seemed to dissolve in the light of Buddy's boundless energy. "Hey, Buddy!" Ethan called. The dog perked up and ran back to him, skidding to a stop at his feet. Ethan knelt down, wrapping his arms around Buddy's neck. "You're not just a hero, you know. You're my best friend." Buddy licked Ethan's cheek in response, his eyes sparkling with affection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and Buddy made their way home, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. The quiet streets of Millbrook felt different now, warmer, more welcoming. Ethan no longer felt like an outsider. He had a place here, and so did Buddy. When they reached the house, Sarah greeted them at the door, her face soft with contentment. She ruffled Buddy's fur as he trotted past her, then turned to Ethan. "Proud of you, kiddo," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You never gave up, even when it was hard." Ethan hugged her back, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I couldn't give up, Mom. Buddy never gave up on me." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, Buddy curled up on the blanket beside him. The soft sound of Buddy's breathing filled the room, a steady reminder of the bond they'd forged. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt truly at peace. The shadows of the past had given way to a brighter, more hopeful future, and with Buddy by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges came next. Months later, the town of Millbrook held a small event in the park to celebrate community heroes. Among the honorees was Buddy, recognized for his bravery and loyalty. Ethan stood proudly beside him as the mayor handed over a plaque that read, "To Buddy, a true hero, loyal friend, and symbol of second chances." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Ethan knelt down to scratch behind Buddy's ears. told you we'd make it," he whispered. Buddy responded with a happy bark, as if to say, "I always knew we would." Together they walked forward, toward the future, toward home, and toward the countless adventures still waiting for them. Because when you have loyalty, love, and a best friend by your side, anything is possible.